Ethan had finally finished college. No more exams, no more late nights studying. He was free. But freedom also brought uncertainty. He had always dreamed of becoming a writer, someone whose words could touch people's hearts. His goal was to work for a newspaper, to tell stories that mattered. But for now, he needed a break. The house felt too warm that evening. The summer air was still, and there was no breeze through the open window. Ethan sighed, feeling restless. He needed to clear his mind. "I'll go for a walk," he thought. The river had always been a peaceful place, a place where he could think. Stepping outside, he inhaled the fresh evening air. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink as the sun slowly dipped below the horizon. The small town was quiet, with only the distant sounds of birds and rustling leaves. Ethan walked past the market and into the open countryside. The river wasn't far, and soon he could hear the soft rippling of water. As he reached the riverbank, he felt a sense of calm wash over him. The water shimmered under the fading sunlight. He watched the birds glide across the surface and let himself enjoy the quiet moment. Little did he know, this evening walk would change his life forever. Ethan stood by the river, enjoying the peaceful evening, when something caught his eye. A young woman stood near the water's edge, gazing at the rippling surface. The golden sunset reflected on her long dark hair, which cascaded down her back in soft waves. She wore a simple yet elegant white dress that moved gently in the breeze. She looked lost in thought, unaware of his presence. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then gathered his courage and walked toward her. "Hello," he said with a warm smile. The girl turned to face him, her deep brown eyes sparkling in the fading light. "Hi," she replied, smiling back. They stood there for a moment, the quiet sounds of the river filling the space between them. "What's your name?" Ethan asked. "I'm Olivia," she said. "And you?" "Ethan," he answered. They began talking, and time seemed to slip away. Olivia told him about her life, and Ethan listened intently. She lived in the grand white mansion on the hill, a place he had admired from a distance but never dared to step near. He, on the other hand, lived in a small, humble house near the market with his mother. Their worlds were completely different, yet standing there by the river, those differences didn't seem to matter. Ethan found himself captivated by her. She was not only beautiful, but also kind and full of life. She laughed easily, and her voice carried warmth. For the first time in a long while, he felt truly happy. As the sky darkened and stars began to appear, Olivia sighed. "I should go home," she said. Ethan felt a pang of sadness. "Will I see you again?" he asked. She smiled. "Maybe. I like coming here." With that, she turned and walked away, her white dress glowing faintly in the moonlight. Ethan watched her go, his heart racing. He knew it was foolish, she was rich, and he was not. But it was too late. He had already fallen in love. Ethan and Olivia continued to meet by the river, their secret escape from the world. Every evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, they would sit together, talking about their dreams, their fears, and their lives. Olivia always arrived in elegant clothes, her dresses made of the finest fabrics, flowing gracefully with every step. Ethan, in contrast, wore the same simple outfits he had always owned. Though he never mentioned it, he couldn't help but feel the gap between their worlds growing wider. Yet when they were together, none of that seemed to matter. Olivia laughed at his jokes, listened to his stories, and spoke to him as if they had known each other forever. Ethan felt alive in her presence, and he knew that his feelings for her were deeper than anything he had ever experienced. One evening, as they sat on the riverbank, Ethan pulled out a small piece of paper from his pocket. "I wrote something for you," he said nervously. Olivia tilted her head in curiosity. "A poem?" she asked, smiling. Ethan nodded and began to read. "I met her in the evening by the riverside. Her dress was creamy white, her hair in ribbons tied. She turned and smiled at me, so gentle and divine. Though I am young and poor, my love will never decline." As he finished, he looked up to see Olivia's eyes shining with emotion. "Ethan," she whispered, "that was beautiful." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Olivia reached for his hand and squeezed it gently. "I love you, Ethan," she said softly. Ethan's heart pounded. "You do?" She nodded. "Yes, of course I do." Overwhelmed with happiness, Ethan took both of her hands in his. He had never imagined that someone like Olivia could love him. It felt unreal, like a dream he never wanted to wake up from. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, they sat in comfortable silence, knowing that despite their differences, something special had begun between them, something that neither wealth nor status could take away. Ethan had never felt more certain about anything in his life. Olivia loved him. That was all that mattered. Over the past weeks, their bond had deepened, their conversations stretching late into the evening, their laughter echoing softly along the riverbank. He knew that their worlds were different, but in her eyes, he saw something real, something worth fighting for. One evening, as they sat under the fading light of the sunset, Ethan took a deep breath. Gathering his courage, he reached for Olivia's hand, holding it gently between his own. "Olivia," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I know I don't have much to offer right now, but I love you more than anything. I believe in us. Will you marry me?" Olivia's eyes widened in surprise, her lips parting slightly as she processed his words. Before she could speak, Ethan continued, his determination unwavering. "I may be poor today, but I won't always be. I'll work hard. I'll become a great writer, and I'll give you the life you deserve. We don't need money or luxury to be happy. We just need each other." He searched her face for an answer, for the reassurance that love was enough. The river flowed quietly beside them, the air thick with unspoken emotions. For a moment, it seemed like she would say yes. Her lips parted slightly, as if the words were on the tip of her tongue. But then, suddenly, she shook her head. Slowly at first, then more firmly. She pulled her hand away from his, taking a step back. "I'm sorry, Ethan," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. Then, before he could say anything, before he could try to understand, she turned and ran. Ethan stood frozen, watching her disappear into the night, her white dress flowing behind her like a ghostly shadow. His mind raced, searching for answers. She loves me. I know she does. Then why? He wanted to chase after her, to demand an explanation, but his feet wouldn't move. A deep, aching pain settled in his chest, spreading like wildfire. The future he had dreamed of, one filled with love, laughter, and Olivia by his side, was suddenly slipping away. Ethan was left alone by the river, the world around him unchanged, yet everything inside him had shattered. Ethan walked home slowly, his heart heavy with confusion and pain. The stars shone brightly above, but they did little to comfort him. Olivia had run away without a word of explanation, leaving him standing alone by the river. Why did she say no? Did I misread everything? His mind swirled with unanswered questions, each one cutting deeper than the last. When he reached his small house, his mother was waiting by the door. She studied his face, her eyes filled with worry. Ethan forced a smile, but she saw through it. He didn't have the energy to explain, so he simply said, "I'm tired, Mother. I think I'll go to bed." She nodded, not pressing him further, but he knew she could sense his sadness. Later that night, just as Ethan was drifting into restless sleep, a loud knock echoed through the house. His mother hurried to the door, her face tense. Standing outside was a man in a crisp servant's uniform. The flickering lantern in his hand cast eerie shadows on the walls. "I have come from the house on the hill," the man announced formally. "My mistress requests Ethan's presence. Please come with me immediately." Ethan sat up in bed, startled. Olivia's house. His heart leaped. Was she calling for him? Did she regret running away? His mother stepped forward, her expression dark with concern. "The house on the hill?" she repeated, her voice wary. She had always been skeptical of the wealthy family that lived there. They were powerful people, and power often came with secrets. Ethan took a deep breath. He had no idea what awaited him, but he had to go. He had to see Olivia. Ethan followed the servant up the long, winding road to the house on the hill. The night was quiet, but his heart pounded in his chest. The grand mansion loomed ahead, its towering columns and gleaming windows glowing under the moonlight. It was a home of wealth and power, a world far different from his own. As he climbed the wide marble steps, he couldn't help but feel out of place. His worn-out shoes barely made a sound against the polished floors. Inside, the house was even more breathtaking. A grand chandelier sparkled above him, its golden light reflecting off the expensive rugs and framed paintings on the walls. Every inch of the mansion radiated luxury, making Ethan feel smaller with each step. Then, his eyes landed on her. Olivia stood behind an older woman, her head slightly lowered. Ethan's heart ached at the sight of her. He wanted to rush to her, to ask why she had run away, but something about the woman beside her kept him frozen in place. She was dressed in an elegant black gown, her fingers covered in large, gleaming rings. Her sharp eyes studied Ethan with cold disapproval, her thin lips pressed into a firm line. She did not need to say a word. Her presence alone spoke volumes. "So," she finally said, her voice smooth yet harsh, "you are the boy who thinks he can marry my daughter." Ethan swallowed hard. He had prepared himself for many possibilities, but nothing could have prepared him for this. Ethan stood tall, trying to steady his breath as Olivia's mother stared him down. The air in the grand room was heavy with tension, the flickering candlelight casting sharp shadows across her stern face. "You," she said coldly, "are nothing." Ethan clenched his fists at his sides but said nothing. "You are a poor boy with no father, no money, and no future," she continued. "Do you honestly believe you are worthy of my daughter?" Her words cut deep, but Ethan refused to look away. He glanced at Olivia, searching for any sign of defiance in her eyes, any protest against her mother's cruelty. But she only stood there, silent, her hands clasped tightly together. "I love Olivia," Ethan finally said, his voice steady but firm. "I may not be rich, but I will work hard. One day, I will be a great writer." The woman let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "A writer?" she scoffed. "A dreamer with nothing to offer? No, my daughter will not waste her life waiting for you to become something you never will." Ethan's jaw tightened. He turned to Olivia, desperate for her to speak, to fight for their love. But when she finally lifted her gaze, her eyes were filled with sadness, not defiance. "I'm getting married in 2 weeks, Ethan," she whispered. The room seemed to spin around him. His heart pounded in his ears. "No," he breathed. "That's not true." But Olivia only lowered her head. "Forget her," her mother ordered. "Leave this house, leave this town, and never come back." Ethan's heart pounded as he turned to Olivia, his eyes pleading for her to say something, anything, to fight for their love. He had expected resistance from her mother, but not silence from Olivia. "Tell me this isn't true," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me you don't want to marry him." Olivia looked down, avoiding his gaze. Her hands trembled as she clutched the delicate fabric of her dress. She took a deep breath, then finally spoke. "I'm sorry, Ethan," she said softly. "I can't do this. I can't live in a small house struggling every day. I don't want to be poor." The words hit him like a punch to the stomach. He took a step back, as if distance could make the pain hurt less. "But you love me," Ethan insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. "You told me you did." "I do," Olivia admitted, her voice barely audible. "But love isn't enough." Her mother smirked from her chair, watching the scene unfold with satisfaction. Olivia turned away, refusing to meet Ethan's eyes. It was as if she had already made her choice. Wealth, security, and a life of luxury. Ethan swallowed hard, his chest tightening. He had believed in their love. He had believed that what they had was stronger than money or status. But Olivia had just shown him otherwise. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice filled with pain. Olivia said nothing. Ethan took one last look at her, the girl he had once thought was his future, then turned and walked out. As he stepped into the cold night air, he felt a part of himself break, knowing he would never be the same again. Ethan walked home in silence, his mind numb. The night air was cool against his skin, but he barely felt it. Olivia had chosen a life of wealth over love, over him. He had poured his heart into their love, believing it was something worth fighting for. But in the end, she had walked away without looking back. When he stepped inside his small home, his mother looked up from her chair. The moment she saw his face, she knew. "Ethan," she said gently, reaching out for him. But he didn't respond. He simply walked past her, his shoulders slumped, and disappeared into his room. The door closed softly behind him, and for days that room became his prison. Ethan refused to eat. He barely spoke. He spent hours staring out the window, lost in thoughts that replayed the moment Olivia turned away from him over and over again. His heart ached in a way he had never known before. A deep, hollow pain that refused to fade. His mother watched helplessly, her worry growing with each passing day. She placed food on his table, hoping he would eat, but the plates remained untouched. She tried to talk to him, but he only shook his head. The vibrant young man who once dreamed of becoming a writer, the boy who laughed and believed in love, was now a shadow of himself. One evening, as she stood outside his door, she whispered, "She wasn't the right one, my son. You'll see it one day." But Ethan wasn't sure he would ever believe that. Right now, all he could feel was the emptiness Olivia had left behind. Days turned into weeks, but the ache in Ethan's heart didn't fade. He still thought about Olivia, her smile, her laughter, and the moment she walked away. His mother worried, but she knew there was little she could do. Healing had to come from within. One morning, while scanning the newspaper absent-mindedly, Ethan's eyes landed on an advertisement that made his heart race. "Write a story and win. First prize, $500 and publication in our newspaper. A chance to be recognized as a young writer." Ethan sat up, suddenly alert. This was his chance, not just to prove himself, but to make Olivia see what she had lost. If he won, his words would be printed for the world to read. Maybe Olivia would read them too. Without hesitation, he grabbed a notebook and a pen. He knew exactly what to write. His love story with Olivia, the joy, the heartbreak, the betrayal. Every emotion he had bottled up poured onto the pages. He wrote from sunrise to sunset, pausing only to breathe. His mother, seeing the fire in his eyes again, quietly placed food beside him, relieved to see him eating again. The days passed quickly as Ethan perfected his story. When he finally finished, he read it aloud to his mother. Tears filled her eyes. "It's beautiful, my son," she said. Ethan carefully copied the story onto fresh paper, placed it in an envelope, and sent it to the newspaper. As he walked home from the post office, a new determination burned in his chest. He didn't need Olivia to believe in him. He would prove himself to the world. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived for Ethan. His hands trembled as he held it. His mother watched anxiously as he passed it to her. "Read it for me, Mother," he whispered. She unfolded the letter and began reading. As she reached the final lines, her eyes filled with tears. Tears of joy. "You won, Ethan! First prize!" she exclaimed. Ethan grabbed the letter and read it for himself. It was real. He had won. Not only that, but the newspaper wanted to meet him. They were offering him a job as a writer. His mother hugged him tightly. "I always knew you had talent, my son." Ethan felt a rush of pride. He had done it, without Olivia, without wealth, and without anyone's approval but his own. Yet, as the excitement settled, one thought lingered in his mind. Would Olivia read his story? Would she understand what she had lost? He didn't know. But as he prepared for his first day at the newspaper, he realized something important. He didn't need Olivia's validation anymore. He had found his own path, and for the first time in a long while, he felt free. Ethan sat at his desk in the bustling newsroom, flipping through a pile of papers. The chatter of his colleagues filled the air, but he wasn't paying attention until he heard a familiar name. "Did you hear about Olivia Sinclair?" one of the reporters said, shaking his head. "She left her husband, just ran away." Ethan froze. He wasn't sure if he had heard correctly. Olivia, the same Olivia who had chosen wealth over love. The sky was grey as Ethan walked toward the church, gripping his notepad. He was covering a funeral for work, just another assignment, except this time it was different. This time it was Olivia's mother. A long line of mourners stood outside, dressed in black. Olivia's mother had been a powerful woman, and the funeral reflected that. Expensive cars lined the street, and a choir sang softly from inside the church. But Ethan wasn't looking at the grand display. His eyes searched the crowd until they landed on her. Olivia stood alone. Dressed in a simple black dress, she was noticeably distant from the rest of the guests. Nobody spoke to her, nobody offered condolences. Their whispers, however, filled the silence. "She's a disgrace. She abandoned her husband, and it killed her mother. She doesn't deserve to be here." Ethan clenched his jaw. He had been heartbroken by Olivia once, but now, for the first time, he saw her as something else, not a woman who had betrayed him, but a woman who had lost everything. For a brief moment, Olivia looked up, her sad eyes scanning the crowd. She saw Ethan. Their eyes met, but before anything could be said, she turned away. Ethan exhaled. This was no longer the confident, elegant girl from the hill. Olivia was now just as lost and alone as he had once been. "That's not even the worst part," another colleague added. "Her mother died from the shock of it. When she found out Olivia had left her husband, she collapsed and never woke up." Ethan felt his heart tighten. He had always seen Olivia's mother as cold and controlling, but he never expected this. "So now Olivia is alone," someone muttered. "Rich, but alone." Ethan's hands clenched into fists. The woman who once shattered his heart was now facing her own tragedy. A part of him still resented her, but another part wondered, was she suffering just as much as he had? Ethan left the funeral with a storm of emotions brewing inside him. He had spent so long resenting Olivia, convincing himself that she had chosen wealth over love. But seeing her today, isolated, broken, and shunned, made him question everything. He felt sympathy, yet he knew deep down that her choices had led her here. That night, as he sat by the window, his mother entered the room with a smile. "Ethan, your cousin Elsa is coming to visit. She's a lovely girl, "And I think you'll enjoy her company," she said, hopeful. Ethan nodded absently, barely hearing her words. His mother wanted him to move on, to find someone new, but his mind was elsewhere. No matter how much he tried to push her away, Olivia lingered in his thoughts. He sighed and leaned back in his chair. Should he forget about her and start fresh? Or was there something unfinished between them? The logical side of him knew he should let go, but his heart refused to follow. Ethan stood at the iron gates of Olivia's old home, now empty and forgotten. The once grand mansion, filled with laughter and luxury, was now abandoned, with a "for sale" sign swinging in the wind. The windows were bare, the garden overgrown, and the place had an eerie silence. Curiosity and unresolved emotions pushed him forward. He tried the front door, but it was locked. His heart pounded as he circled the house until he found a side window slightly open. Taking a deep breath, he climbed through. Inside, the house was unrecognizable. The extravagant carpets, expensive paintings, and crystal chandeliers were gone. Dust covered the floors, and the air smelled of neglect. Memories of Olivia's mother's harsh words and Olivia's hesitant glances flooded his mind. He moved through the empty halls, searching for something, anything, that could tell him where Olivia had gone. Did she regret her choices? Did she miss him? He stopped in the grand parlour, staring at the place where they had once stood together. For the first time, he realized that the house wasn't just abandoned. It had never truly been a home. Ethan's footsteps echoed through the empty halls as he moved deeper into the abandoned mansion. His heart pounded when he heard a faint rustling sound from one of the rooms. He followed it, pushing open a heavy wooden door, and there she was, Olivia. She stood near the fireplace, dressed in dark clothes, her once glowing beauty dulled by exhaustion. She turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Ethan," she said softly, almost as if she had been expecting him. He stepped closer, emotions swirling inside him. "Why did you do it? Why did you leave me?" His voice was firm, but there was a trace of the love he once had for her. Olivia let out a short, bitter laugh. "I married for money, Ethan. That's the truth. I wanted a better life, nice clothes, luxury, parties. I thought it would make me happy." Ethan clenched his fists. "And was it worth it?" She looked away, eyes filled with regret. Number It was miserable. He was old, controlling, and cold. I had everything I wanted, yet I felt trapped. So I left. I didn't want to be someone's possession. I wanted freedom, fun, and excitement. Ethan stared at her, realizing the painful truth. Olivia had never truly loved him the way he had loved her. She had been chasing a dream that turned into a nightmare, and now, standing before him, she was just as lost as before. Olivia stepped closer, her eyes searching Ethan's face for any sign of the love they once shared. She reached out, her fingers grazing his arm. "Ethan, we can be together now. I have money, freedom. I can give you everything you've ever wanted." Ethan felt a deep sadness settle in his chest. He had once dreamed of a life with her, but the woman standing before him was no longer the Olivia he had fallen in love with. Her voice was soft, but there was something missing. Warmth, sincerity, She wasn't offering love. She was offering luxury, as if that could replace what they had lost. "You don't understand, do you?" Ethan said, stepping back. "I never wanted money or status. I wanted you, the real you." Olivia frowned. "I can still be that person, Ethan. We can be happy together." But Ethan saw the truth in her eyes. She had changed. The girl who once laughed with him by the river had become someone else. Someone cold, distant, and calculating. Just like her mother. He let out a deep sigh. "No, Olivia. That person is gone. And so is the love I had for you." For a moment, she looked stunned, as if she never expected him to walk away. But Ethan knew this was the only choice. With one last glance at the woman he had once loved, he turned and walked out of the house. He didn't look back. As he stepped into the cool evening air, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. The past no longer had a hold on him. It was time to move forward. As Ethan walked away from Olivia's old house, a weight lifted from his chest. For so long, he had held on to the idea that Olivia had truly loved him, that maybe there had been a mistake, a moment of weakness she would someday regret. But now he saw the truth. Olivia had never loved him the way he had loved her. She had loved the idea of love, the excitement, the poetry. But when faced with real sacrifice, she had chosen comfort over commitment. For the first time, Ethan felt free. The pain, the heartbreak, it all faded into the past, a story he had lived but no longer needed to hold on to. As he neared his home, he saw his mother standing outside, smiling as she spoke with Elsa, his cousin. Elsa was cheerful, kind, and full of life. She laughed easily, and there was a warmth in her eyes that reminded Ethan of something he had forgotten. Happiness doesn't have to be complicated. As his mother turned and saw him, she waved him over. Ethan took a deep breath and smiled. It was time to stop looking back. The future was waiting. For the first time in a long while, Ethan smiled. A real, genuine smile. He no longer felt the burden of heartbreak, regret, or unanswered questions. The past no longer controlled him. Olivia was just a chapter in his life, one that had taught him about love, loss, and resilience. As he stepped into his small but welcoming home, he looked around with fresh eyes. It wasn't a mansion on a hill, but it was filled with warmth, love, and the quiet strength of his mother, who had always believed in him. And now, he believed in himself too. Ethan's future was no longer about chasing after someone who didn't value him. Instead, it was about his own journey, his passion for writing, the stories he had yet to tell, and the opportunities waiting for him. His dream of becoming a successful writer wasn't just a dream anymore. It was a reality within reach. As he sat at his desk, he picked up his pen and began to write, not about heartbreak, but about hope. Because for the first time in years, he was truly free to move forward. Life is a journey of love, loss, and self-discovery. Ethan's story reminds us that sometimes the things we chase aren't what truly bring happiness. Letting go of the past isn't about forgetting. It's about making space for something better. Through heartbreak, Ethan found himself, his purpose, and a future filled with new possibilities. Perhaps you faced a similar moment in life, a time when you had to choose between holding on and moving forward. What would you have done in Ethan's place? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. We hope this story helped you practice your English listening skills while enjoying a meaningful lesson about life. If you like this video and want to improve your English naturally through storytelling, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss a new lesson. Practice your English. Leave a comment using a new word or phrase you learned today.